At the beginning, a masked man was seen on stage at a concert, holding a microphone. He was thinking in secret, thanking everyone for their continuous support for Personia, saying that his last song was his new song, Hello World. He thought that everyone had a secret or two and asked the crowd to enjoy it to the fullest. The crowd cheered loudly. Among them was a red-haired girl, and many other girls were present as well. The boy thought to himself that his secret was, and the scene shifted, showing a girl in the crowd and another girl watching the concert on her phone. The girls in the audience were going crazy. The scene then shifted to a school classroom, where a gloomy boy, Rintsuki, was sitting at his desk. He was thinking that he was just a high schooler with a gloomy personality, but there was a reason for it. That night, while walking home, he continued to think that there was a reason he did not talk to anyone again that day. He walked into the house and said he was home. On television, a female announcer was reporting, moving on to the latest CD rankings of the week. She announced that Hello World by Personia had taken the top spot. She added that yesterday, Personia had held a live concert at Uegahama Beach. Rintsuki was eating while watching the television. A girl, Akane, commented that the announcer really got worked up when talking about Personia. The announcer on television then said that the concert had been totally unannounced. Akane smiled and remarked that the announcer must really like her Oni-chan. Rintsuki sighed and corrected her, saying that was wrong. He explained that the person was admiring Shion's music, not him. Akane responded with, "So?" Rintsuki told her that if people realized that Shion was a lowlife like him, they would be disappointed. Akane protested, asking if he was just being too negative. Rintsuki insisted that he was simply being cautious, so he would not be hurt by their expectations of the real Shion. With a tense face, he added that it was a perfectly reasonable defense mechanism for his mind. Akane, with a poker face, replied, "Ah, okay, sure," and picked up the remote to change the channel. Rintsuki then said, "Whoops," as he put his glass down on the table, adding that he had to get ready. Akane noticed him and blushed, asking whether the defense mechanism was the reason he was going out looking like that. She pointed out his long, untidy hair, spiral glasses that were already out of fashion, and an otaku look that hardly existed anymore. Embarrassed, he touched his hair and argued that the outfit had helped him keep his real identity a secret until now, adding that it was just how he normally looked anyway. Akane replied that Shion had never shown his true face in public. Blushing slightly, she added that it was a relief for her personally. Rintsuki hugged her with one arm and agreed, saying that if his true identity was ever exposed to the public, they would no longer be able to keep their current lifestyle. Akane, blushing, said that was not what she meant. She stared at his face, and he looked confused. She thought to herself that what she actually meant was that if his face was revealed, many girls would fall in love with her own Ai-chan. She stood up and left, telling him that since he said so, he should make sure the cat was not out of the bag. Rintsuki shook with fear and muttered that if that happened, they would no longer be able to live normally, and besides, it would affect the band's popularity. Akane thought to herself that he had no self-awareness. After dinner, Akane did the dishes and told him to go ahead. Rintsuki apologized, thinking that she probably did not want to be seen walking with a sibling who looked like a servant. Picking up his bag, he announced that he would be heading out. Akane told him to fix his posture. Before leaving, he noticed her haircut and said with a smile that it looked nice on her. Akane blushed, flustered, but before she could respond, Rintsuki ran outside, calling out that he was off. The next scene showed a school building. Some girls were talking, asking each other if they had seen the news about Shion the day before. Another replied that she had, saying he was so cool. Rintsuki was seen running. A group of boys nearby were saying that Shion's new PV was awesome, and another added that Shion seemed to live in Kanto, and maybe he should go find him there. Rintsuki, struggling to walk, thought that he suddenly felt feverish. He worried because he had a test that day and could not skip classes. He told himself he had to do it for the sake of the band's future and for Akane. He managed to reach the entrance, where a girl noticed him with a questioning expression. In Class 2B, some students were chatting. One girl was reading a book, another was laughing. Suddenly, Rintsuki reached the door and entered the room, struggling. He thought that somehow, he had managed to reach the classroom and only needed to get to his seat. Some girls were talking happily about Shion's live concert. One said she got to see Shion live on her birthday, calling it the best birthday ever. Another said she never expected a concert at sea. A third laughed and said seeing Shion in the flesh had been unreal. Suddenly, a boy interrupted, saying it was all thanks to the information he had given them. The girls ignored him, one asking why he was freely inserting himself into the conversation and calling him a shameless eavesdropper. The boy complained, saying his name was Kaminoki. Meanwhile, another girl looked at Rintsuki, commenting that Kichiro looked like a zombie and that he was gross. Another added that he had always been creepy. third brushed it off and said they should keep talking about Shion. Kaminoki then approached Rintsuki, asking if he was okay. Rintsuki, still shaking, said yes. Kaminoki warned him not to study too hard, and Rintsuki replied that he knew. Rintsuki thought to himself that yesterday's live had happened because of Kaminoki. When Sakino believed the false rumor planted by Kaminoki, she had been willing to cancel her birthday party just to go to a non-existent concert. However, Rintsuki thought a mere false rumor would not stop him from protecting the smiles of his fans. He thought he would do it for the sake of his precious fans and classmates, though the girls in his class did not consider him their friend. The teacher interrupted, telling everyone to return to their seats. Rintsuki's thoughts broke, and he told himself to hold on a little longer to protect his precious body. Later, he returned home. Saying he was back, he was greeted by Akane, who was alarmed to see his red face. He insisted it was just a small fever and not a big deal. Akane disagreed, taking his bag and telling him to change and sleep. He obeyed and lay down on the sofa, still thinking he had done well on his test. Akane ran to find medicine, but he told her it was fine, that he could just rest in his room. When he moved toward his room, Akane blocked the door, flustered. She tried to explain, saying she had been reading manga and the room was messy, her face red with panic. He told her he didn't mind if she spilt snacks, but she shouted that wasn't the reason, insisting he rest on the sofa. Rintsuki thought she was really worried about him and considered making a small joke to lighten the mood. From the sofa, he teased her, asking if she wanted to sleep together. Akane, blushing furiously, shouted that he was an idiot and told him not to say things like that. She yelled for him to die and shoved medicine at him. Rintsuki responded by saying he wasn't sure if she wanted him to live or die. He thought to himself that he was hated by Akane again and drifted off to sleep. The next day at school, Rintsuki was thinking to himself, satisfied that he had gotten first place again on the test. He laughed inwardly, saying there was always something to achieve by studying alone while others enjoyed their youth. Then, to his surprise, tears began streaming down his face. He wondered why he couldn't be popular for being good at studying. Suddenly, a voice from behind called out to him. Someone asked if he had time. Turning around, Rintsuki wondered in excitement if it was finally his time to be popular. Instead, his head was pressed against the wall by a girl. She confirmed he was Suda Rintsuki and said she was borrowing him for a while. Her face was intimidating, and Rintsuki, scared, agreed. The wall even cracked under her force. The scene shifted to the girls' toilet, where Rintsuki was standing, trembling. He thought it had to be a misunderstanding, wondering why they were ganging up on him. Many girls were present. The girl, Rinka, told him that because he always took the #1 spot, Yoshiharu could never get first place. With an angry expression, she demanded that Rintsuki teach her some of his study tips so she could pass them on to Yoshiharu. Rintsuki, stunned, thought that it was a strangely cute demand. The other girls objected, saying Rinka was letting him off too lightly and suggesting they beat him until he could no longer study. Rinka argued that would be going too far and that she could get Yoshiharu to first place with just the tips. Rintsuki wondered why she was so pure. Another girl accused Rinka of being scared. Surprised, Rinka turned, slammed her hand beside Rintsuki, and declared she would take away his nerdy glasses so he could not study. With a guilty face, she reached for him. Rintsuki noticed she seemed to be forcing herself and decided to play along. He told her that if she took away his glasses, he would never be able to study again. Rinka slammed her hand on the wall again, his second kabedon of the day, before grabbing his collar and leaning closer. She whispered in his ear, apologizing and promising to return them soon. Rintsuki was stunned and blushing. When she removed his glasses and saw his face clearly, she covered her mouth in shock, blushing as she muttered, "Eh." Rinka was blushing hard as she looked at his face and thought to herself that it was so cool. Rintsuki was confused. From behind, one of the girls called out to her, asking, "Rinka-san," wondering if his face had been so creepy that it left Rinka speechless. All of them laughed, with one girl commenting that it was just as expected from a face that looked like a monster. Rinka, still blushing, grabbed his hair and messed it up. Rintsuki cried out in shock. Rinka then quickly declared that they were better off not looking at his face, her blush deepening. One girl asked in surprise if his face was something that transcended ugliness, laughing. Another pointed out that Rinka's face looked red. Rinka, flustered, told them that since they had already taken his glasses, they should leave. The group started walking away, with one girl waving goodbye and calling him a monster, telling him to sit and cry for a while. Rintsuki sat down on the floor, listening as they left. He heard them saying that now Yoshiharu could finally be set to the top. He thought bitterly that even people outside his class called him a monster. The scene shifted to the hallway outside. Ritsuki was walking while thinking about how, without his glasses, he was supposed to return to class. He considered looking down to hide his face, covering it with his hand. He also thought about the girl Rinka who had seen his face and then remembered that his spare glasses were in his bag. Suddenly, someone grabbed him from behind, and he was startled. It was Rinka, who made a silent, blushing expression. Shocked, he stammered, recognizing her. They stood near a stairwell, where Rinka bowed deeply, apologizing for earlier. She admitted that she never thought she would be forced to act like that, and said she was truly sorry. Extending her hand, she returned his glasses. Ritsuki took them, saying, "Ah, okay," while thinking that he did not really need them anyway, since they were only for disguise. He asked her why she was doing this. Rinka explained that she had really wanted to return his glasses, so after parting with the other girls, she hurried back. Blushing, she added that if he walked around without them, it would be dangerous. Ritsuki, confused, put his glasses on and suggested they talk somewhere else. Rinka, surprised but agreeing, followed him. They moved to the school rooftop. There, Rinka smiled and introduced herself properly, saying her name was Hikage Rinka. Ritsuki thought to himself that she really was not a bad person after all. He started to introduce himself, but Rinka interrupted with a smile, saying she already knew he was the school's #1 student, Suda Ritsuki. He thought with some tension that such a kind girl had a very fearsome pair of breasts indeed. Ritsuki then asked her about what had happened earlier, mentioning that it seemed like she had been forcing herself when she took his glasses. Rinka admitted with some discomfort that she had not wanted to do those things. She confessed that she was not even interested in Yoshiharu. However, everyone kept saying that she and Yoshiharu looked good together and started cheering for them. Deep down, she explained, she was just a timid nobody, afraid of losing her friends, and so she lived up to their expectations until things turned out that way. Ritsuki thought that the mask of being popular was something he could understand, since he was in a similar position himself. He commented that she had it rough with her friends. Rinka told him he could just call her Rin, since they were classmates. Ritsuki was shocked and said that he could not just suddenly call her that and preferred calling her Rinka. With a satisfied expression, she said she liked it better that way. He wondered why she was so meticulous about it. Suddenly, she leaned close to him and asked if she could call him Ricky. Shocked, he agreed. Rinka blushed and smiled happily, repeating his nickname several times. Ritsuki, tense, wondered why she was so glad but decided that as long as she was satisfied, it was fine. Then, she remembered something and searched her pocket. Pulling out 2 tickets, she explained that she had something to give him as an apology. Ritsuki looked at them in shock, realizing they were for Shibuya. Rinka confirmed, excitedly explaining that they were tickets to the preview screening of a new movie, the one for which Personia had performed the theme song. She invited him to go together next weekend, blushing as she spoke. Ritsuki thought bitterly to himself that of course he knew, since he was the one in charge of the theme song as Shion. He also knew he was supposed to appear at the screening as a surprise. With a disappointed face, he bowed and apologized, trying to decline. Rinka, surprised, lowered her face and said she understood, apologizing for inviting him so suddenly. Ritsuki, panicking, quickly added that on that day, he was planning to wander around Shibuya aimlessly. Rinka, stunned, brightened immediately and said that if he was free, he should have just said so. She laughed happily, lightly hitting him. Ritsuki laughed nervously, agreeing. With a smile, she suggested that they meet at her house that day, offering to send him the location and asking to exchange line IDs. They exchanged their IDs, and Rinka jumped in excitement, cheering that she had gotten Ricky's line contact. Ritsuki thought in disbelief that he had just gotten the contact of a high school girl and worried if this was okay, wondering if she might ask him to transfer money or something. Rinka then asked shyly if there were any other girls who had exchanged line contacts with him. Blushing, Ritsuki answered that none had, except his family members. Rinka smiled, laughed, and blushed, happily saying that it was just her then. Turning away with a smile, she reminded him not to forget about the screening. He agreed, still shocked, thinking that he was shaking and knew the reason. She smiled warmly, told him he had better not forget, waved her hand, and left. Ritsuki thought to himself that as long as she was smiling, then everything was fine. His identity had not been exposed anyway. But then he realized it was bad. Next was PE class, and he had to go change quickly. He worried about what he would do for the day of the screening. The scene shifted to the school gymnasium. The teacher announced that the class would be playing badminton and instructed everyone to make pairs of 2. Ritsuki sat on the ground, shivering, thinking that it was the #1 phrase he hated most from teachers. Make a pair. He thought that schools were so inconsiderate toward the feelings of loners. The teacher then added that anyone without a partner should come forward. Rintsuki thought that it was like they were trying to humiliate loners publicly, just to pair them up. Not wanting the attention, he stood and walked forward, thinking bitterly if it was really so rare to see leftovers like him. The teacher announced that they had another leftover. Rintsuki was shocked and thought angrily that the teacher, Gouda, should not have phrased it like that. Then, he noticed someone approaching. A girl stood in front of him, smiled, blushed, and said she was pleased to be working with him, calling him Shion. Rintsuki was shocked and leaned in close to Shiina Yui's face. With a tense expression, he told her not to call him by his stage name while at school. In his mind, Rintsuki thought about her: silky silver hair, delicate facial features, carefully maintained, and the charm of a beautiful little girl who inspired the instinct to protect her. Shiina Yui, the popular genius drummer of Personia, was one of the few people at school who knew Shion's true identity. In a low voice, Rintsuki warned Yui that if his cover was blown, she would also be in trouble. Blushing, Yui muttered to herself in awe about how close Shion's face was. The teacher interrupted, ordering the two of them to team up. Rintsuki immediately agreed with forced enthusiasm and dragged Yui along. Nearby, several boys noticed them. One boy exclaimed in disbelief that Shiina Yui was with that guy, recalling how she had previously told him she already had a partner. Another boy admitted the same had happened to him, and a third boy added that he too had been rejected. Rintsuki glanced at Yui, who avoided his gaze, blushing and fiddling with her hair. He wondered why someone so popular with boys had no actual friends. When Yui noticed him staring, she teased him by saying that if he kept looking at her that way, she would get aroused. Flustered, Rintsuki tried to change the subject by reminding her of her struggles making friends. Yui denied this, claiming she had plenty of friends. Rintsuki countered, suggesting she was a loner just like him. The teacher then called out to everyone, instructing them to begin warm-up rallies with their partners before the doubles matches started. Holding a racket, Rintsuki invited Yui to begin the warm-up. She stared at him seriously and said she wanted him to talk to her as he usually did. Rintsuki begged her to stop, reminding her that they were not Shion and Shiina here, and if people saw them being overly friendly, it would look strange. Yui smirked, calling it classmates role-playing, which only irritated Rintsuki further. When he told her to get ready, Yui turned away, blushing, and touched her hip, claiming she could not because her lower back still hurt from what Shion had done to her last night. Shocked, Rintsuki yelled back that it had only been band practice and that she had exhausted herself from drumming too hard. Yui ignored his outburst, only remarking again on how close Shion's face was as she blushed and reached out her hands toward him. She whispered reassuringly that nobody had heard them. Annoyed, Rintsuki reminded her firmly that his name was Suda at school and asked her to remember it. Yui tilted her head, asking mockingly if Suda was some kind of child entertainer. With a frustrated sigh, Rintsuki turned away and insisted they start the warm-up. Yui protested again, saying she couldn't raise her arms. Rintsuki was exasperated, though Yui added cheerfully that at least her drumming skills had improved. Despite his irritation, Rintsuki admitted it was a good one but reminded her they still had a match coming up. Yui told him not to worry because she had a plan. She would run around the court pretending to play while leaving everything else to him. He shouted back that it was impossible and urged her to at least try her best. Yui replied that she had already worked hard the night before at band practice. Rintsuki protested that he had also worked hard. Yui teased him again, insisting that last night she was with Shion, not Suda. Rintsuki groaned in frustration, admitting she got him with that one. The teacher then announced the start of the matches. Rintsuki and Yui stood ready, but Rintsuki thought to himself that they had done nothing to prepare. Yui volunteered to check the tournament chart. As she walked away, Rintsuki wondered who their first opponents would be. Nearby, two girls were complaining about having to go first. They mentioned that facing Shiina and Kitaru would be an easy win. Rintsuki recognized them as Minagawa and Emi and Grimaced. As he turned to leave, he overheard the girls gossiping about Shiina, calling her annoying and saying she deserved to be alone since she had rejected so many invitations from good-looking guys. They accused her of acting high and mighty just because of her looks and even made fun of her eating habits. Rintsuki gave them a sharp side glance and thought to himself that he could hear everything clearly thanks to a singer's sharp ears. He defended Shiina in his mind, recalling how much she ate like the time she devoured an entire cake by herself. The girls whispered to each other, hinting at something nasty they were planning. Before Rintsuki could dwell on it, Yui returned and told him they were going first. He acknowledged her with hesitation, still uneasy about what the girls had just said. The match began. The shuttlecock landed within the line, and Minagawa and Emi celebrated with a high five. Rintsuki collapsed onto the ground, exhausted, and began explaining in his mind that according to Sheena's plan, he had to return every shot while she simply stood and watched, doing nothing. He was drenched in sweat but noted that despite her condition, they were managing to win for the moment. Yui approached him, blushing, and whispered how much she enjoyed watching Shion's heavy breathing and struggling face. Rintsuki thought bitterly that she was a sadist. He told her to step back, warning that she was too dangerous being so close. Their opponents prepared a powerful shot. Rintsuki saw the trajectory and realized in horror that it was aimed at Yui. He tried to intercept but couldn't reach it with his racket, so he threw his body forward. The shuttlecock hit his cheek, knocking his glasses off as he fell. Yui cried out in alarm, rushing to his side. Panicked, she told him to hide his face before anyone else saw it. Rintsuki thought to himself that she was trying to protect his identity, but worried about the risk of being recognized. Just as he searched for his glasses, he realized his face was pressed against Yui's chest. Blushing, Yui assured him softly that everything was fine because his face was being covered. Rintsuki, however, thought to himself that it was not fine at all, especially as blood began to trickle from his nose. Rintsuki lay against Yui's chest as she hugged him tightly. He thought to himself that the last time a vicious Jaru had spiked the shuttlecock, it had put Suda-kun's face at risk of being exposed. But thanks to Sheena's angelic embrace, the crisis had been contained, and yet, Suda-kun's youth began overflowing. His nose started bleeding. Alarmed, Yui called out to the teacher, asking if she could take Suda-kun to the nurse's office. The teacher agreed, telling her to rest with him until the nosebleed stopped and to make sure he didn't forget his glasses. As Yui tried to tend to him, she exclaimed in panic that blood was everywhere. Holding his nose, Rintsuki thought bitterly to himself that she misunderstood. This blood hadn't come from an injury at all. He muttered aloud that it was fine. Two girls approached, smirking. One said with a false tone of apology that she hadn't done it on purpose, while both of them laughed. Yui's expression turned dark with anger. She muttered that those bitches had dared to harm Shion. Rintsuki thought to himself that it wasn't their fault. His bleeding was simply from getting aroused. The scene shifted to the infirmary. Yui gasped upon entering, realizing nobody was inside. She helped Rintsuki onto the bed and, in a panic, insisted that if they didn't do something quickly, Shion would bleed to death. Rintsuki told her to calm down, reassuring her that he wouldn't die. Internally, he felt the weight of his guilt growing heavier. He tried to insist that he would be fine on his own, but Yui shook her head fiercely. With a worried expression, she declared that she would stay with him no matter what. Rintsuki thought with surprise that Yui was worrying so much her personality seemed to have changed. Feeling guilty, he apologized to her. Startled, Yui asked what he meant. He explained that her gym uniform had been stained by his nosebleed and that it looked horrific. He promised to wash and return it later. With tears still in her eyes, Yui refused, saying she would wash it herself. In his mind, Rintsuki admitted it would be disgusting to bring it home anyway. But Yui secretly blushed, thinking that since it was Shion's blood, she would never wash it. Yui pointed out a spare tracksuit on the shelf and said she would go change into it. Rintsuki lay back down, saying he would rest in the meantime. Yui agreed but noticed him lying with his face turned away. He told her to go on and change, reassuring her again that he would be fine on his own. Yui, however, softly said she would stay until he felt better, since he had protected her. From behind the curtain, as she began changing, she added that she wanted to return the favor. Rintsuki panicked internally. He thought to himself that Shiina didn't mean it in that way, but the situation was making his imagination run wild. Blood threatened to gush from his nose again. Desperate, he slapped himself and shouted, startling Yui. Trying to settle down, he forced himself to sleep, reminding himself not to think of anything strange. In times like these, he thought, he should just count immoltos. He began reciting Akane's name in his head, but instead of calming down, it felt like heaven. His nose started bleeding once more. He panicked silently, realizing it was coming out again. At that moment, the door opened. It was Rinka. She rushed over, calling his name with worry, explaining she had heard he was injured. Sitting up, Rintsuki assured her that he was fine, though he seemed puzzled. Without warning, Rinka pulled his face into her chest, exclaiming in relief that she was glad he was okay. Rintsuki, buried between her breasts, thought frantically that he was being attacked both in body and mind. The curtain suddenly flew open. Yui, half changed, froze at the sight of Rinka pressing Ritsuki's face against her chest. In shock, Rintsuki thought about how bizarre it was that the most popular girl in school was holding him like this, and that her chest was far too dangerous. Rinka then turned her stern gaze to him and demanded to know who Yui was. Yui, stunned, realized Rinka had addressed him by his real name, Rintsuki. Overcome, Yui sank to the floor, tears streaming as she apologized to Suda-kun. She muttered that a flat-chested, socially awkward girl like her shouldn't burden him, especially since he already had access to magnificent breasts. Rintsuki flailed in panic, insisting she was misunderstanding everything. He protested that if she said it like that, it sounded like he was the one with big boobs. Rinka's expression darkened, and she asked in a low voice whether he had lied about being injured just to bring another girl into the infirmary. Rintsuki desperately denied it, begging her to believe him. In a panic, he turned to Yui, asking her to explain. Yui, still crying, wiped her tears and stammered an explanation. She admitted she had taken care of him and, for the first time, held his face against her chest because of the nosebleed. She confessed she hadn't wanted to leave him behind. Rintsuki thought to himself that her explanation wasn't nearly enough, but Rinka's expression softened. Laughing lightly, she said she understood and apologized for doubting him. She pulled Yui into her lap, hugging her affectionately. Rintsuki thought with relief that at least the misunderstanding was resolved, even if the outcome was unexpected. Rinka doted on Yui, calling her small and cute and declaring she wanted to take her home. Yui, embarrassed, tried to resist, saying her gloominess and awkwardness might be contagious. Rinka dismissed that with a smile, insisting that they were already friends. Yui was stunned by the kindness, her eyes shining with admiration. She whispered to herself in disbelief that such wholesomeness could exist, feeling as if she were melting. Rinka teased her further, suggesting they should take a bath together next time. Rintsuki thought to himself that Rinka clearly had ulterior motives and warned Yui silently not to be fooled. Rinka then added that she was glad Rintsuki was okay, but criticized the girl who had hit him with the shuttlecock for not checking on him. Yui, still in Rinka's arms, vowed to make them kneel in apology, adding that Suda-kun enjoyed making girls kneel. Rintsuki shouted at her to stop spreading slander. Yui, however, insisted to Rinka that Suda-kun was like that, urging her to keep her distance. Rintsuki yelled in exasperation that she was lying right in front of him. Rinka, half believing Yui, said if Rintsuki liked dojeza, she would do it for him as long as he didn't force others. Stunned, Rintsuki thought to himself that she actually believed her and wondered if he really came across that way. Meanwhile, Rinka continued doting on Yui, rubbing her cheek against hers. Yui, overwhelmed, thought that the space had turned holy, though she admitted to herself that if her true sadistic personality were revealed, the roles between her and Rinka might reverse. Ritsuki's nose began bleeding yet again as he stared at them. Both girls rushed to him in alarm. The scene shifted back to Class 2B. Rintsuki sat at his desk, finally relieved that the nosebleeds had stopped. Suddenly, the two girls from before approached, half mocking and half apologizing, claiming things had gotten out of hand earlier. They laughed together. Adjusting his glasses, Rintsuki muttered that he wouldn't be fooled and warned them not to underestimate a yokai. The girls laughed, asking what that even meant, finding his words funny. Before the conversation could go further, Kaminoki barged in, grinning. He asked Rintsuki how it was. Rintsuki blinked, confused, asking what he meant. Kaminoki clarified with excitement that he was obviously talking about the sensation of Shina, San's breasts. Both the two girls and Rintsuki were struck speechless. Internally, Rintsuki thought bitterly that Kaminoki had a handsome face, but he wasn't popular because he was exactly that kind of person. One of the girls, Minagawa, muttered that Pervnoki was the worst. Kaminoki brushed her off, saying they were having an important conversation, and smirked that the girls weren't ones to talk after what they had done earlier. Terrified, the two girls left in silence. Rintsuki realized Kaminoki had noticed. Kaminoki proudly declared that he didn't watch every girl's movements for nothing. He then turned back to Rintsuki, demanding excitedly to know how Shina's breasts had felt. Rintsuki was left speechless again, thinking to himself with despair that Kaminoki really was that kind of person.
By the way, if you enjoyed the video, maybe consider liking and subscribing, pretty please?